Good afternoon. Here we are. We've come together. Woo! Before we begin, just a reminder, turn your phones on, sometimes I like to say on sacred mode. Turn it off or put it on silent. That goes for all the panelists as well. Hello, I'm Brian Rohr, founder and director of the Stafford Challenge and host of the conference that this event is part of. So this is a very special afternoon, as both we're launching the start of the first ever Stafford Challenge conference, as well as welcoming the public to this fascinating panel discussion, William Stafford and his Archive, a life record of creative practice. So I welcome you all. For those of you who are part of the conference, we're going to have a more formal opening ritual at 3 o'clock. So we end this at 2, and then you can go off and do whatever, and then at 3 o'clock, come back in the same space, and this is where we're going to be to kind of formally open the conference with just us. For those who may not know what the Stafford Challenge is, it's an international poetry project that I founded in 2023, where poets sign up committing to write a poem a day for a year. It was inspired by the daily writing practice of William Stafford. And I like to tell people, kind of famously, the idea came to me, and it's true, in a long, hot shower. I was just thinking about how I wasn't writing as much as I used to, how being a father, having a full-time job, I got kind of out of the habit. And I do well with containers. And as I was thinking about this, William Stafford popped into my mind. And his practice of writing a poem, or at least a scrap of poem, every single morning. And I was like, well, what if I tried that? What would it be like? What if I committed to doing that for a year? But I didn't want to do it alone, so who can I invite? Well, that was exactly it. I decided to invite everyone, the whole world. I was just like, what if anyone who wanted to could sign up and join me in this commitment? And so this idea, and what if I call it the Stafford Challenge? And so I get out of the shower, and as a lot of times when I always have big ideas in the shower, and I leave the shower and they kind of dissipate off like the steam, of the smoke, or the steam dissipates. But this time, instead of just going to bed, I went to my computer and wrote Kim a letter saying, I got this idea. I would love your family's blessing and permission to use your father's name and likeness for this challenge. And I didn't know if I was going to get a reply at all. I wasn't necessarily even expecting it. He didn't know who I was. I was just a random person. But the next morning, I received the most generous email saying, yes, absolutely, my father would love this idea for sure. And so I created a website, I put a small ad out in the world, contacted a few writing organizations, and I was like, all right, maybe 50 people will sign up. This will be fun, they'll keep me accountable. By the time we began for the year, and we start on January 17th, which is William Stafford's birthday. By the time we began, so I opened registration in November of 2023, and January 17th of 2024, we had 1,153 people. I know, right? From 23 countries, 49 of the 50 states, plus Washington, D.C., and I was amazed. We're now in our third year. So we now have the third year cohort of people. This year we had 1,450 people sign up. Over the 3 years, we've had over 3,000 people participate in this challenge. I mean, who knew we were going to start a movement? So when I had the idea of the conference, it seemed only natural to want to partner with Lewis and Clark College, right? This is the very place where William Stafford taught for so many years, inspired students to find their own voices as writers, bringing his unique level of trust in their own creative process. And it's also the institution that acquired his archive and all of his papers after his death in 1993. So for the past few decades, students and scholars have had the opportunity to continue to study and learn from this remarkable man and writer through the dedicated work of the Special Collections Department at Watzek Library, right? This is amazing what has been done. And so it's with this backdrop that I really want to offer my sincere gratitude to the past and current archivists who have helped maintain this collection. I'm also so grateful just to the partnership with them to help bring the Stafford Challenge Conference here to Lewis and Clark. And I particularly want to thank Hannah Krume and Crystal Willer, who have been just dear partners in this endeavor. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So today, we have an opportunity to hear more about this poet, this remarkable teacher, this person, William Stafford, and learn about the key players who helped bring the archive here to be preserved, rather than, having a giant bonfire and just burning them all, The panel includes moderator and panelist Crystal Willer, along with Jim Armstrong, Doug Erickson, and Tim Barnes. So thank you for all being here. And of course, it includes one other person for whom I am so thankful, whose support helped bring the Stafford Challenge, this conference, and this panel discussion all to fruition, and who, while being just an incredibly talented, respected, and established poet in his own right, was tasked with being the executor of his father's literary estate. And he was honestly done a remarkable job at that. So that person is obviously none other than our own past Oregon Poet Laureate, Kim Stafford. I'm now going to pass the mic over to Kim. Take it away, Kim.
Can you hear me? That's actually the question of every poet. Can you hear me? And the thing about an archive is you can hear the writer after they're gone. In letters, photographs, journal entries, poems, drafts, all kinds of things. I want to start with the William Stafford poem, 15. South of the bridge on 17th, I found back of the willows one summer day a motorcycle with engine running as it lay on its side, ticking over slowly in the high grass. I was 15. I admired all that pulsing gleam, the shiny flanks, the demure headlights fringed where it lay. I led it gently to the road and stood with that companion, ready and friendly. I was 15. We could find the end of a road, meet the sky on out 17th. I thought about hills and patting the handle got back a confident opinion. On the bridge, we indulged a forward feeling, a tremble. I was 15. Thinking, back farther in the grass, I found the owner, just coming to, where he had flipped over the rail. He had blood on his hand, was pale. I helped him walk to his machine. He ran his hand over it, called me good man, roared away. I stood there, 15. My dad was asked by a librarian at one point to write his autobiography, 60 pages, and he dove right in. He got up to page 45, and he was 15 years old. And he thought, well, what about college? What about the war? What about my career? What about my books? And he realized that as a writer, the important things had pretty much happened by the time he was 15. And the wonderful thing about an archive is you can go back to the source and trace the journey through many days of practice. When my dad died in August of 1993, in his will there was one sentence that jolted me. My literary executor will be my son, Kim. And when I first read that in May of 93, I said, Daddy, that sounds like a lot of work. You'll be great at it. That was my instruction. So we brought 62 boxes down from the attic. We rented an office above the Fat City Cafe in Multnomah Village. We started sorting through the boxes. I remember one of the first boxes had in his scrawl, abandoned poems. And there were, 500 poems in there. I pulled one out at random. It was a great poem. So that was just a key to the treasure we held. Then there was a kitchen fire in the Fat City Cafe, so we moved the archives to the basement of a house in Multnomah Village, owned by a dear friend, Diane McDevitt, and then began a golden age, where Doug Erickson, Paul Merchant, Jeremy Skinner, Vince Wixon, Patty Wixon, we had this dream team of people who were just obsessed with organizing, learning, bringing forth treasures from the archive. Doug and company compiled a complete bibliography of the publications. It's on the table out here. Paul and Vince edited a couple books about teaching. So right away, the archive was a living thing. It was a studio for creation, not a warehouse for finished work. Now, you writers, a practice leads to an archive. An archive is the natural outcome of a sustained practice. And when my father died, Charlie Selezicki, who was a wonderful advisor, a lover of books, a publisher, just a very wise bibliophile, he said to me, your father had a few habits and incredible consistency. Writing every day resulted in this rich archive. Now, the thing about an archive, which Crystal and others may talk about, is when you organize it, put it away, protect it, save it, you don't yet know what its use may be. And if we just think of one element since my father died, as we tumble into the age of AI, what is available in 50 years of handwritten work, where every thought and every stroke of the pen is coming from an individual soul? That, if you take the tour of the archive with Crystal, you'll see some of those pages. One thing about my dad is, and you'll see this in the archive if you spend time there, he was sometimes chastised for not revising enough. He said one time, I can turn any poem into a gem, but I'm more interested in chasing rabbits. He was always interested in the next thing. But if you spend some time in the archive, you see what actually happened is he revised his ability to write. Things came to him more fluidly. And so a finished poem might only take a few rounds of tinkering. I want to just end with some questions before I pass this on to Crystal. Where are your boxes? What will happen to them? Is there someone who might care for them? How might you order them to be kind to that person? So many times there were questions we wanted to ask William Stafford. What does this scrawl mean? What is this? Or how come you put this with this? As writers, you can have compassion for prosperity. And I guess the last question before I turn it over to Crystal is, how could spending time looking, considering, shaping your own archive enrich your writing practice? You know, how could you begin to see, what is my thread? What are my obsessions? What are my recurring curiosities? How could a sense of my work as a knit whole feed my creative practice? So I'll leave it at that. Crystal.
Thank you. I guess I have a plethora of microphones. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Kim, for asking those questions that I do think we will get back to. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with you all. My name is Crystal, and I work in special collections here at Lewis & Clark as the Associate Archivist. I've been in this role for just about 4 years, so I was not around for the processing and cataloging of the Stafford Archive. But I do have the pleasure of being the person who coordinates research and reference requests and visits from students, faculty, researchers, really anyone interested in the Stafford Archive. I'm also a Lewis & Clark alum. I was an English major here about almost 20 years ago. And after college and working at Powell's and restaurants, I earned an MFA in poetry from Washington University in St. Louis, and later a library degree from the University of Wisconsin. And I tell you that to both introduce myself, but to explain that it really, truly is a pleasure for me to get to work with not only the William Stafford Archive, but literary and particular poetry manuscripts and collections that we have here at Lewis & Clark. It's really the material that got me interested in this line of work. So that's a little bit of my background and how I interact with the archive. I thought we would begin by having panelists introduce themselves by describing their association with the William Stafford Archives. I know we all have different relationships and different points of entry. Doug Erickson, I was hoping we could start with you, because I know you were just instrumental to the archives coming to Lewis & Clark and being in the shape that they are in now.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. So I'm the interloper here, even though I may be one of the few people that still has memories of person-to-person relationship with Bill. So I come from a little bit of a different direction than many of you. I'm not a poet, so I wasn't going to his workshops that many of you may have attended. I wasn't a scholar or studier of his work when he was alive. I was a young archivist just learning how to find my way in the world of higher education, marriage, and fatherhood. And our daily ritual, which wasn't every day, but was often, and I have to say that I used to think that Bill was coming to see me, and in part he was, but his granddaughter was sometimes upstairs at Watzek Library with her mother, Beverly, and Rosemary was running around, and so it was a two-part thing, and I'd sometimes have my youngest son, Nick, with me, who was about 1 at the time, and so it was probably baby hour as much as anything, but he would introduce himself as the old man and knock, 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 old man in the archives, and we would sit down and we would talk. And the remarkable thing about our relationships was it had nothing to do with poetry. We talked about wives and babies and diapers, bottles, bicycles. Bench seats was a really important thing we talked about, both in old cars and trucks, how to be a good husband, how to be a good father, the kind of ordinary things of life. And so looking back, what I realized, Bill wasn't trying to teach me about poems. He was quietly teaching me how to live. And I'll continue with a few more stories, but I want to give more time, but that's a little bit of the context. So I knew the man, and after he passed, I knew the poet. And I'm really glad I have that perspective that I get to carry with me, that I get to tell my children about and my friends and family about. and the long-standing 40-year relationship with Barb and Kim and Dorothy when she was here, Kit, and Guthrie, who volunteers at the library. His grandfather, the lineage goes straight up that way. So just really thankful to be back here and to be able to talk a little bit about my relationship.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Jim Armstrong, do you want to go next since you have the...
Just so you guys know, up here, it's really hard to hear what people are saying up here because there's so much reverb coming from this beautiful building. So my name is Jim Armstrong.
Sorry, you can't hear?
Can you hear me?
Let's find out.
All right, how's this? Is this better? Okay, cool. My name is Jim Armstrong. I am a teacher of creative writing for 30 years. I taught at Boston University, Northwestern School of Art Institute of Chicago, and then Winona State University in Winona, Minnesota, where I ended up most of my career. And now I'm retired. I have 3 books of poetry, 1 book of essays about the environment, and God willing, my final project will be a book on William Stafford, A Critical Study, which I've been working on for the past 10 years, and I've been spending a lot of time either in the archives in person or in the online function, which I'm going to talk about. I'm also, by the way, those of you poets, I'm the founder and one of the judges of the Maria Faust International Sonnet Contest. So if you're a sonneteer, I urge you to submit to our contest, which is financially rewarding. I think that's it for now. Oh, I'm on the board of the Friends of William Stafford with Tim, and I also urge you to join the Friends of William Stafford and to take a look at some of the newsletters that are sitting outside of this chapel.
You think this is a better mic?
My name is Tim Barnes, and I was asked to send an introduction to the panel, and sent this. Tim Barnes taught in the English department at Portland Community College, Sylvania campus for 25 years, where he was the chair of the creative writing department. He has 2 collections of poetry, of Almonds and Angels and Definitions for a Lost Language. He has been the editor of the Friends of the William Stafford Journal and newsletter for poets and poetry since 2011. And just as a little background of that, I came to, I really liked what Kim said about having a relationship with somebody in the archive, because I have been in sustained relations with the work of William Stafford since I came to Oregon in 1973. Anybody else come in the migration of 73? After doing alternative service during the Vietnam War, at a home for disturbed children in California. It did not seem coincidental that Stafford was also a conscientious objector in another war. In Oregon, for reasons that many people in this room probably share, I became passionate about poetry and discovered William Stafford's work in an anthology called Naked Poetry, edited by Stephen Berg and Robert Mezzi. And then soon after read Writing in the Australian Crawl. And I went back to graduate school then and studied with Stafford's good friend Primus St. John and wrote several papers on Stafford, one of them called Daniel Boone's Psychiatrist. And I heard Bill read several times, even chatting with him at parties, which he always left early, with Dorothy, so he could get up early in the morning and do something I think you guys know about. And then I worked in Poetry in the Schools program, which was then called PITS, and carried Stories That Could Be True and riding the Australian crawl in my briefcase all over Oregon and Washington. With that wonderful notion, a writer is someone who enters into sustained relations with language for experiment and experience available in no other way, tucked inside. I encourage children to write poetry by telling them that when William Stafford was asked when he became a poet, he responded, "The real question is, when did everyone else stop?" The innateness of poetry in children, people, and life and language has always profoundly encouraged me and seems latent to me in almost everything William Stafford writes.
Thank you. I realize we kind of assume that everyone here is already familiar with the William Stafford Archive, but I wonder if Doug could sort of describe the archive as it first came to Lewis and Clark, and if it changed by the time it was sort of finished, like processing, I guess, if you could, yeah.
Thank you. So I had the luck of being at Fat City, above Fat City with Kim, at Sunningdale, at Diane's basement, and then eventually here at the college. So I got to see it for pretty much all of its life after Bill had passed, and a little bit of his life when he was still alive. And what I can tell you is the secret is that you really, with all due respect, you have the wrong person sitting here. It should be Paul Merchant. Paul was an academic from England who came over here with his wife and wound up in Portland and became connected with Kim and became the archivist for the family for the papers. And Paul wasn't classically trained as an archivist, so and you all benefit from that because he didn't have a concept of what a folder level description would be. He was very much in tune with an item level description. So literally, that has got to be the world's largest item level description archives in this world. And from that, he came with the collection to the college, and he finished his career here as a member of our team with Jeremy and myself. But he is the person who created the matrix and the backbone and the foundation for the organization of what you find today. And we all need to just give that guy a round of applause. I mean, he really, if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't be seeing the things that you're seeing today. At least it would be a lot longer before you were. So he did an amazing, amazing job. So from there, Kim and I were close, and we talked and had many discussions, some with happiness, some with sadness, and over, a 20-year period almost, I think. So that when they did finally come, with the blessings of Dorothy, and we got Paul and with that, we were able to finish the bibliography, and you'll see on the bibliographies, you won't see our names on there, and that was purposeful. This was really started by a colleague of Bill's, Jim Peary, who was the library director here for many, many years, and was a huge fan of Bill's, and he was the one that started that bibliography. And he got it to a really good point, but he passed away 30 years ago, I think, or maybe 35 or 40 now. And he had stopped doing it about 10 years before that. So it needed to be completed. He'd always wanted it to be published, and it never got to that space. So we finished it for him with Jeremy, Paul, and myself, and Jeremy and Paul really being the leads on that, and me helping. I got to put on my research hat and try to track down various publications and where they were and how they were. And we've done 2 bibliographies together, one on Lewis and Clark and one on Stafford. And it was really a golden time to be able to do that. But I want to just reemphasize that the archives exists in its form because the Staffords had the foresight of hiring Paul. And when they did that, they created what you have now, as well as everyone else that's worked on it since then. I don't want to take away their credit as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know. I think it is probably the very largest collection that is described at so detailed, which is really amazing. Kim, I have a sort of strange question, but is there anything that you like about your father that we wouldn't know from the archive that is maybe something that can't be captured in a historical record like this?
So I've never talked to Doug about this, but didn't we give a double-bitted axe as part of the archive? I don't know if that's still in there, and there's I don't know, we probably didn't put the two-man crosscut saw in there. But these are two really icons of my father's character that, you know, we moved 7 times until I was 8 years old. And we got our stuff into a little green trailer, and there wasn't much room, but that saw and that axe were always in there. And I think it was a part of his blue-collar conception of himself as an honorable working man. So when I think of my dad, you know, I think of his gloves, his torn coat, you know, his sort of regular guy accoutrement. And so when you go in the archive, you get the mind, you get the legacy of friendship, you get the, you know, wide relationship with people all over the world, you get the history of his pacifism, but I'm not sure you get that rugged man of the earth dimension.
Thank you. Tim and Jim, since you've both been, you know, using the archives so much, I wonder, do you remember like the very first material that you looked for and was maybe had a connection with, or sort of felt like it made the, you know, your research or your scholarship, you know, sort of like unique and meaningful? Do you remember what the first?
Well, I became the editor of the Friends of William Stafford Journal and Newsletter, and at that point, and that of course led me to the archives. And so I just wanted to remind people that outside on those tables with this beautiful display of books that Kim put out, there are all sorts of issues of the Friends of William Stafford Journal and Newsletter, which are free. Just take them, and if you are interested in becoming a member, there's a form inside. So those are available out on the table. And I also wanted to mention that there's a website connected with the Friends of William Stafford, williamstafford.org, which you can get to through the Lewis and Clark Archives website. And there, if you're interested, you can find these very beautiful paper crane broadsides that are one of a kind for very reasonable prices that also support the legacy of William Stafford. And in response to the question, the first time I came up to the archives, I was interested in looking at the records of Stafford's experience in the CO camps. And so I started looking around because I had read Down in My Heart, and I was interested in finding out more. And so I looked in that, and I found some very interesting short stories that he wrote, and also some early essays about education and things. And I also became acquainted with his proto-hippie wild man friend, archivally Glenn Cofield, who is one of the most interesting men you could run across. Kim could tell you more. And there's never been a biography of him, but I have utopian aspirations of doing so, because Glenn Cofield was really something. So that was a wonderful discovery of those Cofield and the papers from the CO years. Jim?
Yes, I think first of all we need to back up. And we need to say, why? Because you're all here sitting in the audience. You all are poets, aspiring, hungry poets. And do you want to hear about a guy who's dead and has a bunch of papers in a library? Maybe, maybe not. But I think the point here is that all of you either have or need mentors, and most likely they're dead. There's a famous moment in the Divine Comedy where Dante is being led to the gates of hell, and Virgil says, well, wait a minute, we're in purgatory. So over there are the great poets, and they want to talk to you. And Dante says, oh, gee. And so he goes over and he talks to the poets that made him a poet, the poets that inspired him into the language of poetry. And Dante says, I'm not going to talk about what we talked about. It's too personal. So you never get to learn what it was he actually said with the great poets. William Stafford may not be your mentor, but I think that this is an example. This archive is one of the great archives of the world in terms of its organization, its depth, and its completeness. And you need to find somebody that you're going to be obsessed with, that you're going to want to be intimately involved with. And the first thing that I did when I got to the archives was I went and looked up what William Stafford wrote the day I was born, which you can find, any one of you, if you're born between 1950 and 1993. That was very meaningful to me because I had just discovered William Stafford belatedly, and he was very important to a change in my poetic practice. This archive is a vast, interactive, biographical experience. And it's free, and you can come up here if you live in the area or if you want to come and hang out in Portland. I advise you to do it. But on the other hand, if William Stafford's not your poet, maybe you need to find somebody else's archive. But just as you read the biographies of poets in order to learn how to be a poet, you come to an archive, it's like we say, there's his handwriting. There's the last poem he wrote on the very day he died. You can read it, and you can think about what that would mean to be so committed to that daily writing that you write a poem and then you just die. Right? That's intense. So I think we need to remember that this archive is not just a clerical, scholarly thing, but it's a passionate thing. And I would say that one of the things I've learned most from spending time in the archive is the extreme value of the first draft of every poem you write. By which I mean, that first draft is first contact. And Stafford teaches this in his writings about writing, which I hope you will peruse. Writing the Australian Crawl, You Must Revise Your Life, these great books of his. But one of the things he points out is that you don't write the poem writes you. And that first contact, that first draft, it may be messy, it's not publishable, but it contains all of the complexities, all of the contradictions, all of the things that you were feeling at that moment that began the poem's birth. And you immediately begin to ignore all that. And as you rewrite, you mess it up. You all know what I'm talking about. You rewrite, and then the poem is dead and inert, and you wonder why. So if you don't save your first drafts, if you write on your phone and overwrite, and that first draft disappears, you're in trouble. So one of the reasons you need to keep your archive is because it's poetry practice to keep that first draft. And I will say, handwriting a poem is very important. And I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
I'm so glad you said that. One, I do actually have several people come in looking for daily writings on their birthday. It is a somewhat, like, not uncommon thing to do. But your second point to talking about, keeping your own archive and your own practice, I mean, I will say right now, like, I write poems on my computer. I don't save my first draft always. Sometimes I make a new page, and so I'll have many, many pages. But I'm not great at file naming conventions for my own personal, I am for the archive, but not for my own personal work. And I like to be able to write and feel like I'm free to not answer for what I write and to not have everything saved and sort of experiment and play. I think that gets at two things. One is just sort of different approaches to a practice, but also I do think technologically is very different now. I think the William Stafford Archive captures not only just a person, but also a place and a time, and thinking about the carbon copies of correspondence that we have, right? Like things, I mean, you have emails, archives now, but there's lots of differences in thinking about it. But I do often think about, ways that the archive can be inspiring and sort of instructional for one's own creative work, even though I don't necessarily do it. Are there any questions? I mean, should we open it up to see if we have any questions from the audience? If not, we can continue with questions. But this can be a very welcoming discussion. I don't know if anyone in the audience has particular questions for anyone here. If not, oh yeah. Is this the only microphone? Sorry.
Seems like the best one.
I believe it was Tony, you mentioned you're writing a book on William Stafford. Can you tell us when it's going to be published and some interesting tidbit that you found? Or?
Can you hear me? So I understood the question was, I'm writing a book, what's it about? That was a question? Yes. Well, the thing about, I was just saying this to Steve Paul. Where's Steve Paul? You want to raise your hand? Steve Paul has just finished a book on William Stafford, which is coming out in May, I think. You're all going to want to buy that book. It's going to be the definitive biography of William Stafford. What I'm doing is more of a critical study, which means I'm engaging in the critical discourse about, poetry, philosophy, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to hopefully, what I was saying this to Steve is that it's an ocean. William Stafford is an ocean. He was the most productive poet, I think, that anyone's ever heard of. There are so many poems out there. So trying to get your hand around writing about William Stafford is hard. For me, I think I'm going to focus on his first two books and their transformative power for him and also for the writing of poetry. So that's basically my approach.
I think if you want an answer to that question about what is Jim Armstrong's book about, you just need to go to the Friends of William Stafford journal and newsletter, which are, as I said, are all lying out there, and look and find his articles, because there's a number of them, which Jim has assured me may appear in his book. So if you're curious about it, the answer is out there on that table and also on the web at williamstafford.org, where every single issue is online. And I just want to say something else that in terms of the abandoned poems, I took a class from Kim at the archives. It was a daily writing class in the archives. And Kim said, what do you guys want to do? And I said, I want to look at those abandoned poems. So I did. And I wrote a piece on it, which you can find on the Lewis and Clark Archives website under under scholarship, student projects. just go, I don't know if you guys have been on that wonderful website. But anyway, so you can find my essay, The Abandoned Poems of William Stafford, a preliminary report, in which I did not find that gem that Kim is talking about, although I did find some very interesting lines and things. But one of the things that Stafford did, and Stafford is, and I've written about this in the journal, was a really democratic poet. And so much so that in his early poems that he was sending out, he drew lines to the capital letters at the beginning of the poems. Because, like lowercase Cummings, who was, don't capitalize, don't make one letter more special than the other. And so he got all those out. And he also, you can find in that a number of the seeds for some of his most famous poems, like at the chairman's housewarming party, which is about his experience at the Iowa's Writers' Workshop. Starts out as a poem called Cold Parties. And at a farm at the Great Plains, which starts out as the forever telephone. And the farm in the Great Plains has that line about a telephone line goes cold.
Doug, I wonder if you'd tell just a little vignette about a visit that you and Stafford had. You couldn't hear? Oh, okay. Doug, yeah, there you are. Could you just tell a little story, a little vignette about one of your visits with Dad?
Sure. Thanks, Barb. One of the things he told me, I wrote down a few things, and I would keep notes after our talks. Didn't know why I did that, but I'm glad I have. I'll tell you a couple of things. He showed me the proper way to change a cloth diaper. My young son was in cloth diapers, and it was all about the safety pin and making sure it was sharp, and how you would do that. And that was great. I appreciate it. The most important thing that lasted long after diapers was the fact that he said, always have a car with a bench seat. And he said, because when Nick gets older, he's not going to want to look at you and talk to you, but he wants to talk to you. So you go for drives. And then you both look outside the window and you talk. And that's when the best conversations happen. And that's really what he taught me in life, was that it's not about the memories, it's not about the accolades, it's about the conversations that we remember. And really that archive is a conversation to all of us. Some of us have the opportunity to have direct conversations. One of the things there's two things I want to share about that also, but he taught me that being a pacifist was always a work in progress, and you never fully accomplished it, and there are lots of setbacks. So it made much more sense in that way to me when he would talk about it, that it's aspirational, where you're never completely a pacifist, but you're working towards it, and you're going to have fits of anger, you're going to do things you wish you hadn't, and not just about taking another person's life, but saying things that you regret and doing things differently. But the most meaningful thing he ever shared with me, I've not shared with anybody but my wife, except for Kim and Barb yesterday. I kept this in my notes, and it was back in that time when my one-year-old son, my wife was in grad school, and here at Lewis and Clark in the mornings, and he came over for a visit, and we were having a conversation, and he said this to me, that as I best remember it, and I've continued to look at it and remember that memory. He said, and I think it's really important that I share this now, especially as a grandpa. I didn't necessarily think about it until that time, but he said, I have come to think that the measure of a life is rarely found in the grand moments. It's found in showing up again tomorrow. Be the father who listens before speaking. Be the husband who remembers that kindness is a daily practice, not an occasional gift. Be the citizen who leaves the trail, the town, and the conversation a little better than you found them. Most of us will never change the whole world, We are always changing someone's world by how we choose to walk through it.
Yes.
Sorry, Steve, I didn't share that with you earlier, but but it was that's been with me. I've walked with that for a long, long time, and it's really been a North Star for me in many ways. I come back to it from time to time, and so it's my own little archive of one thing or two things that I remember from his time on this earth with me, and I've got to also have all those experiences with his family as I feel like an honorary family member for all these years. You could have easily had my wife up here to talk about stories about Dorothy, which are magical and great, as well as all of you that have had experiences with this family. But I think it's a really reflection of his conversation. He's talking to us. And yes. I have come to think that the measure of a life is rarely found in the grand moments. It is found in showing up again tomorrow. Be the father who listens before speaking. Be the husband who remembers that kindness is a daily practice, not an occasional gift. Be the citizen who leaves the trail, the town, and the conversation a little better than you found them. Most of us will never change the whole world. We are always changing someone's world by how we choose to walk through it.
So my question comes out of the proverb, may you live in interesting times. And specifically, I'd like to know what the archives have to say about William Stafford's journey as a conscientious objector. Doug, you just touched a little bit on that. I'm just bringing it back to the rest of the panel. What does the archivist have to teach us about his journey as a conscientious objector?
Yeah, one thing the archive represents is his daily practice that started during the war. Because here were all these young men rounded up, and they decided, there were about 200 of them in the camp, and they decided, we will be a college. We will be a school. You know, at 8 o'clock, we're going to go off and do manual labor. We're going to fight fires, we're going to build roads, we're going to arrest soil conservation. But at 3 in the morning, we're going to be teachers and learners. And so whoever in the camp had some realm of expertise would offer a class. And one thing my father started doing is getting up at 3 and writing every day. And in the archive, you can see those very early pages. So in a way, his whole life of artistic practice is a result of being interned.
And doesn't he say in You Must Revise Your Life something about, I got up in the morning to work on my integrity?
Yeah, I think it's repair work on my integrity. Yeah, every day. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. Obviously, for daily writing, it's not about just becoming a famous poet. It's about repairing your integrity every day by interacting with your deep self, I think, and that's why when you feel dry or when things are going nowhere, you're out of touch with your deep self, and you need to find it again. And writing is one way to do it.
I've often thought that my father's way as a teacher was as a pacifist, that he was not the swaggering expert. He was not the general in class. He was the inviter, the welcomer, the hospitable listener. So I think it affected his teaching also.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, Steve.
If I can add to the answer about how the archives speak to the CO experience, One of the things about the archives that you'll find out when you go on tour is the vast, and I think the count is 100,000 pieces of correspondence. There's 72, 75 boxes filled with folders, filled with letters that Stafford wrote and that were written to him. They're kind of in different organized areas. But there's a great amount of material about the CO years. Stafford was not only, part of this sort of informal college of educated and artistic people. He was he could be the camp librarian. They had books, they read books, they talked about books. He was also an editor and a writer of newsletter items. Some of the camps published newsletters, monthly newsletters that he shared with his family and would send to friends, and you could find him writing about his experience. I found in the archive some of there are collections of his earliest poems, some of which have been published, not all, some of which have been published in that great book called Another World Instead, which is a collection of the earliest poems of William Stafford. There are photographs, not a lot, but there are photographs. But one of the great things about the Watzek Library is not only is there material about William Stafford in the camps, there's material about others, a guy named Kermit Sheets. There are other CO experienced families whose papers are in the archive, so you can start building kind of a web of his experience. I did a deep dive into his CO year memoir and found some new way of looking at that of that book. This has been a great discussion. I appreciate all of you, and I agree with all of the things that have been said about the archives and about what you can find there. Jim, I appreciated how you talked about the, what it says to poets. I mean, the vast amount of draft material of the abandoned poems that Kim mentioned. When I went into this project about writing a biography of Bill Stafford 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago, one of the things I thought about was whether it could make me a better poet. And I think I'm not, this is sort of a humble brag, but I think it turned me from a really mediocre poet into kind of a sub-minor quasi-poet. So I'm happy for having that experience. And to answer your question about books in progress, yes, my book, William Stafford, The Shadow Poet, will be published next April by Oregon State University Press. And anyway, happy to be here. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions, or I have a... Okay.
Crystal, I want to ask you, what kinds of visitors come to the archive? What kinds of questions do people have? What kind of quest do people, are they embarked on when they come to the archive?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I often have, I think like the fans of Stafford are a special breed of really, really passionate people. So they are often looking for daily writings, that sort of draft, sort of seeing the handwriting, actually getting to leaf through a folder. Yeah, so often they're tracking down a poem, a daily, trying to track the thread from daily writing through a draft and through particular poems. Stafford's correspondence series is sort of my favorite. It is over 100 boxes of correspondence. You could pick, you can sort of pick any poet, like in that time period, American poet, or not. And like chances are there will be a letter from, that they have written to William Stafford or William Stafford has written to them. And because he did write on carbon copies, often we would have his outgoing letters in addition to incoming letters. So often, we do have researchers looking, whether it's Marvin Bell or Richard Hugo, or sort of tracking down other other writers and sort of trying to see that network, that poetic network that exists. And then I have, students at Lewis and Clark will come in and look at a lot of the William Stafford broadsides, sort of thinking, poetry students who are designing their own poetry broadside and are looking for inspiration and design choices. So it is, it is really fun to sort of see people using it both to track down and sort of research history, but also to spark their own creative work, right? Like through inspiration. Yeah. Any other? Oh, yeah.
I would add just a couple quick things that I think I've learned from the library just as a poet, right? One is it's not just about the first draft. It's also about keeping track of that first draft. It's also about keeping track of every revision. It's also about keeping track of every place you put that poem to a magazine. And then, as you said, keeping your correspondence organized so that you know what editors you talked to and what possible projects were brought up and who said, well, try me next time and so forth. I mean, Stafford is the most organized poet you are ever going to meet. And I think it was Flaubert who said you must be regular and methodical in your daily practice so you can be wild and creative in your art. He was that. So I've learned to be more organized as a result of the archives. The other thing I would say is that Stafford didn't start out thinking he was going to be a poet. He thought he was going to be a fiction writer. And that's important to know because he just pretty much failed at that, but he found his groove. The other thing is that the archive contains a great many photographs. He had a side gig as a photographer. He had another way of expressing himself creatively. So that idea that you ought to have a different kind of creativity, not just the poetry one, but maybe you want to be a sculptor or something. Like that inspires me as well. So I think that when you study a poet's life, there are so many lessons for you as an apprentice poet.
I don't know how we're going to end, but I want to put something in. I am so grateful to Doug and Crystal for being the keepers of this complex treasure that has a future life we can't envision. It's going to keep talking to the future, and I'm so grateful to both of you for creating it and guarding it.
Thank you, Kim. And I would like to say, perhaps everyone knows this, but we also have in the archives the Kim Stafford Archive that I had that was sort of my first, when I arrived, I sort of finished processing it and had the pleasure of meeting with Kim over many years. And I wonder, Kim, if you could say anything about how your archive, are there echoes of your father's archive, which I think there are, and are there ways that the archives are very different or that they really separate?
Well, I was inspired by watching Doug and Paul and others put the archive together, and so when I brought my many boxes to Lewis and Clark, those categories of the correspondence and the drafts and the book manuscripts and the photographs, are in there. I think the main thing I learned in compiling the archive, because I had compassion for Crystal and her student laborers, I wanted to organize it as much as I could to ease the burden for them. But in the process, I found out so much more about who I am. To go back through time, to survey my circle of friends and the correspondence, to see the different projects that were huge in their time and then, came to a conclusion. This rhythm of creative work and rest and discovery and something completely new beginning. It was an opportunity for me to look in the convex mirror and see how all that fit together. I'm so grateful for the process.
Thank you.
Time for one more question.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, this is, as being an archivist of other history stuff myself, but what kinds of like materials do you store the things in, and do you let people handle the original, you know, like that preservation of paper? So how do you, what are your tools for doing that?
Yeah, so you're asking how we store materials and how the preservation. Yeah, so we store materials in, you know, archival, acid-free boxes, folders. We do, you know, we are a teaching archive, and as a college archive, we do really prioritize access and letting people see the original documents. We do let them handle documents, although I will say we have a lot of, we sometimes put materials in like a letter in a plastic sleeve just to help, you know, preserve it in that way. And then of course we store the archive in a vault that is climate controlled and temperature controlled, and sort of, you know, sort of making sure that everything is sort of kept in the best, along the best preservation practices. Oh yeah, and just, yes, in the reading room you can only have a pencil. No ink, no food, no water. So I think I want to thank everyone, my fellow panelists, for being up here. And I just want to say everyone is invited and welcome to, after this talk, to sort of exit and wind to the left. You can follow myself, Kim. We're going to walk back down into Watzek Library and into the archival special collections reading room. And I have put out a little sort of exhibit and display of William Stafford archival materials. Those of you who are in the Stafford Challenge workshop conference, you will come, and who want to, you can come and see these materials on Saturday. But for those of you, so maybe particularly for those of you who are just here today, if you're interested, I really welcome and invite you to come see some of these original, you know, handwriting, drafts, books, manuscripts, all types of material. I tried to pull a wide array of different materials in the archive. Any last remarks?
The archive is primary materials. I remember that term. You know, secondary materials are wonderful. It's what Jim will bring forth. It's the newsletter. It's what Steve Paul is creating in the archive, where the archive has grown the fruits of those primary materials. But the archive itself, I think a writer can appreciate this. When I put my hands to the keys or my hand with a pen, I'm creating a primary document, the source. And I think the integrity of the individual is what happens at that point. So to be in the archive is to be reminded of your own responsibility as a human being to put forth your original truth.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Crystal, to Doug, Kim, Tim, Jim. Thank you so much, so much, so much.